Blizzard! A woman whispers, "Save me, please." Boone steps off the trail and the West sends the bill. Rope cuts, a barn in flames, a pistol at his ribs, hollow ice underfoot. Law is thin, quiet's alone. Stay with this ride to see what a man keeps when he's lost everything else. The wind came down out of the bridgers like a whetstone on bone, shaving the world to ice and quiet. Boone Whitaker leaned into it from the saddle, collar up, hat brim crusted white. His gelding blew steam and rattled the bit, iron cold against old scars. Snow hissed along the ground the way a rattler talks before you see it. Boone drew the horse up and listened a second time, because out here sound lies once, not twice. There it was, thin as thread, dangled on the gale. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Save me, please. He didn't move for a breath. You hear plenty on winter wind. Barn doors, coyotes, a man's own regrets. But that wasn't wind talk. That was a throat. Living. He let the gelding step off the trail, hooves crunching the snow's glassy top, and eased between firs black with rime. The timber opened to a drifted swale where a sleigh lay on its side like a dead beetle. Runner snapped and tongue split. Sleigh bells hung there dumb as stones. A tarp had half blown free and lodged in a tangle of brush. Under it, the shape of a person. Boone swung down. The cold took his knees and spit clear through his pants. He shoved the tarp back. A woman stared up past him at nothing, lashes rimmed with frost. Rope, stiff with ice, bit deep into her wrists and ankles, the strands fattened by sleet. The cuts were angry and black along the edges. Her mouth worked once, twice, and failed. When she dragged air, it whistled like a busted reed. "Save me, please," she said again, barely more in the shape of words. Boone's hand was already on his belt knife without asking him. He stopped it there the way a man stops his own horse at the edge of a creek you don't trust. Knife work at a scene like this has a way of writing endings you can't take back. He lifted his head and measured the tree line, the drift humps, the shallow ditch, where country boys like to lay a rifle. Nothing moved but spindrift. "All right," he said, voice low, as if the trees had ears. "You're still with us." He slipped a glove off and set 2 fingers to her throat. Pulse fast, jumpy, skin like wet marble. He pulled the glove back on and shrugged out of his coat, a heavy wool mackinaw that carried the stale tang of wood smoke and horse. He draped it over her, tucking the sides in tight. One hand always turned toward the timber. "Name?" he asked. Her eyes tracked to him, unfocused, then found anchor. Lydia," she got out. "Pierce." That name fell on the snow with weight. Boone had heard it. Harlan Pierce ran half the timber up Gallatin Way and rented the other half to men who thought they did. Contracts with the railroad. Money enough to make trouble grow teeth. "You heard anywhere else, Miss Pierce?" Boone said. Her gaze flicked to the rope, then to the busted sleigh runner, then to the white. Shame made a small hot spot in her face, the way shame does even when it's got no business there. She nodded once. The rope trembled. Boone looked at the knots. Whoever tied them knew rope like a cowhand knows branding smoke. The strands were slick with ice. Any quick slash would saw flesh as sure as freeing it. He slipped a hand under the tarp and felt along the bed. Grain sacks, a can of lard gone hard as a stone, a blanket stiff as tin. He took the blanket, shook off what ice he could, and made a rough windbreak along the sleigh's broken side. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice steady, the way you talk to a skittish colt. "I'm Boone. I got a line shack 1.5 miles north. Stove, water, something that passes for soup. But I don't cut on these ropes till I see what they did to you. We move careful. You with me?" Her lips cracked into the ghost of a smile that hurt to see. "With you." He scooped a handful of clean snow, cupped it to her mouth. She let it melt there, slow, like sipping time. Color crept back into her cheeks until the wind stole it again. Boone straightened. The day was blue steel and already bending toward a short winter dusk. Tracks told tales in that light, and he read what he could. 3 sets of boots coming in from the south, a scramble around the sleigh, a drag like a sack pulled off and pitched. The outgoing prince angled west toward a stand of fur and vanished where the wind had scoured them flat. One of those heels had a chip out of the outside edge. Same print, 3, 4 times. Men in a hurry or men who wanted you to think so. He thumbed the gelding's reins up shorter, brought the horse close, and made a sling out of the tarp and blanket. The rig would do to drag her gentle across firm snow if he kept to the drift's crown. He set it, tested it, and let the horse feel the tug. "Miss Pierce," he said, "I'll lift you on my say-so. It'll hurt some. You cuss me if you need to. I won't take it personal." Her breath showed white and ragged. "I don't cuss easy. Out here it pays to learn a little," he said, and the old habit came out of him without asking. He looked once more at the ring of fur and the hollow places where shadows pretend they're stumps. "Out here, quiet's just alone." He slid his arms under her shoulders and hips. She was lighter than she looked, all wire and will under torn wool. The first inch brought a hiss through her teeth. The second inch drew a groan. He paused each time till her breath caught up. "Easy now," he murmured. "One breath, one move." When he settled her into the sling and wrapped the mackinaw around her again, she shut her eyes as if the dark itself was warm. Boone took the lead rope, tied it short to the saddle horn, and stepped out ahead of the gelding, breaking the crust. With his own boots. He didn't look back at the sleigh. That was a dead thing. The live thing was here, and it had asked. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, a crow scolded. Whatever it is, crows scold. Boone set his shoulders to the north, eyes cutting the white for a flicker of motion that wasn't snow. He walked. The horse leaned. The sling slid like a sled along a path he didn't trust, but it held. Behind him, Lydia said nothing. Sometimes that's the bravest sound a person can make. Boone's line shack sat where the timber thinned and the wind found gaps. A low-roofed box of rough plank, one small window glazed with frost, stovepipe leaning like a drunk. He shouldered the door with his hip and hauled the sling in, horse blowing steam outside. The shack smelled of old ash, sheep tallow, and damp wool. The sort of smell that says a man has made it through worse than one winter. He fed the iron belly of the stove with split tamarack till it chattered, struck a match, and watched flame take like a frightened animal that finally decides to bite. Heat licked out slow. He set a coffee can of snow on a melt, then a kettle for soup. The glass in the window ticked as it learned the meaning of warm again. "Stay with me, Miss Pierce," he said, easing her close to the stove, but not so close the thaw would bite back. "Slow fire saves more lives than fast." Her lashes were wet now, frost turning to water. She worked at the rope with her eyes, not her hands. He studied the knots again, then lifted the coffee can when the snow turned to a slosh of gray. He poured the melt over the ice-stiff strands until the rope woke up from its winter and went pliant. Only then did he open his belt knife. The edge sang soft. He slipped it under and cut as gentle as a prayer. The first free hand trembled, and then flattened on the floorboards, feeling wood like it was home. The rope had gnawed deep. Angry ridges ran purple under the skin. He set her wrist in his palm, turned it, and made himself breathe even. "Burn?" he asked. "Feels like bees under the skin," she said. Her voice had a little more meat on it. "Good," Boone said. "Means blood still wants the job." He wrapped the cuts with clean strips torn from a shirt that had seen better years. He ladled thin broth from a pot that lived on the back shelf for just such days, a soup built on bone and onions and the memory of fat. He tipped it to her mouth. She sipped and winced and went back for more. "Lydia," she said clearer. "Lydia Pierce." "Boone Whitaker," he answered, as if that settled the account. Footsteps scuffed on the hard yard outside, steady, not sneaking. Boone's hand went to the Winchester by the door out of habit, but he didn't work the lever. The latch lifted, and a wedge of gray light let in a woman wrapped in a sealskin coat, cap pulled low, a doctor's bag hanging from one hand, and a hickory walking stick in the other. "Don't shoot your own help," she said, calm as a ledger. "Wynne told me you dragged something worth my trouble." "Doc Hazel," Boone said, letting the breath out he hadn't meant to hold. "You were cutting across the fence line?" "House call up on Flat Rock," she said, stomping the snow off. "Baby who didn't want to wait for spring. You going to stand there decorating that stove, or make room?" Boone moved. Doc Hazel knelt by Lydia and looked at those rope grooves with a hard eye. Her fingers were square and steady, nails cut blunt. She sniffed the wounds the way good doctors do when they're checking for rot before they ask you to name it. "Frost nip and rope burn," she said. "You've got luck stitched to your underskirt, miss. Give me your hands." "No, palm down. Good. Boone, boil me water clean and fetch the carbolic." He did as told. Hazel cleaned and wrapped, tight where it needed to be, gentle where the nerves screamed. Lydia's jaw went white once, then came back. Hazel watched her face the whole time, like a scout reads weather. "Who did this?" Hazel asked, without looking up. Lydia's eyes flicked to Boone, then to the tiny window where wind worried the world. "Silas Murdoch, Reeves Pike." Boone felt the names as if someone had posted notices on his ribs. Hazel's mouth thinned. "Silas was foreman for my father," Lydia said. "On the timber contracts. He told the railroad about bad ties from the South Spur. Sappy wood dressed up as heartwood. They fired him for it. Said he'd made trouble. Pride turned on him after that. He started running with whoever would listen. Men started listening if they were paid to." Hazel tied off a bandage, sat back on her heels, and looked Boone up and down as if she were fitting him for a simple, uncomfortable fact. "Men who feel wronged make the worst kind of wrong, Whitaker. They'll burn a house to watch the light on their own faces." Boone stared at the stove lid. Heat marked his cheeks, not his thoughts. "If I step in, they'll come for my place," he said. "Torch it just to hear it pop. I've seen that trick." Hazel's hickory stick rapped the floor once. "Do it anyway." Lydia set the cup down with both hands, careful, as if the cup were a thing that could be lost and not found again. "He's right. They will come," she said. "But I'm not ready to die in the snow, not in a ditch men made for me." Boone took his hat off and set it crown down near the door. A man's hat on a floor is a kind of oath if you watch the old ways close. He ladled more broth, handed it over, and watched Lydia's fingers find surety around the tin. "You carry a gun, Doc?" he asked without looking up. "Carry a stick," Hazel said, tapping it. "Easier to put a man to sleep without waking the undertaker, but I can shoot if the night demands manners." The corner of her mouth twitched. "You know how to count breaths, Miss Pierce?" Lydia blinked. "Count? 2 in, through the nose, hold for 1, out on the squeeze," Hazel said. "Works for stitches and gun triggers both. Life is mostly learning where to pause." Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Boone smiled at that, the way a man smiles when something touches an old truth he forgot he knew. He set more wood in the stove and let the fire answer its own questions. Outside, the wind eased for a heartbeat and then came back like it remembered a debt. "You could take me to town," Lydia said. "Sheriff can put his name between me and them. I'll give my statement. After that, you never have to see me again." Boone felt the rope of the choice in his hands, the way he'd felt the frozen line earlier. He could lay it down, walk out, let the winter wash the prints away. He could keep his barn, his horses, his quiet. He could ride on and tell himself the wind lies twice. He looked at Lydia, at the raw bands circling her wrists, at the way she held the cup with care like she'd promised herself something. He looked at Doc Hazel, who was watching him like a neighbor who knows what you owe and will not take change in talk. "Out here," Boone said, his voice rough. "Quiet's just a loan. Somebody's got to pay it back." He stood, reached for his coat, and started packing the few things that made the shack more than four walls: coffee, jerky, matches, a small Bible that had belonged to a woman who didn't live to see this winter. He slipped the Winchester into a scabbard, cinched the saddle, and shook snow off the horse's mane. When he turned, Lydia was already trying to stand. "Easy," he said, stepping to her. "One breath, one move. We go to Bitter Creek. Sheriff Amos can write his name over this mess. See if law still has teeth." Lydia nodded. "If we live," she said, steady now, "I won't leave you behind." Hazel shouldered her bag and took up the stick. "Then let's live," she said. "And Whitaker, whatever comes, remember not to hurry your trigger or your temper. Both will cost you more than a barn." Boone hitched the door open. The cold laid a hand on them, familiar as an old enemy. He set his hat, settled his shoulders, and led them out into the white. Morning came in pewter, the kind that never quite turns to day. The shack's window showed nothing but a sheet of frost and the faint shape of the horse blowing fog. Boone stepped out to test the snow. It held a crust that sang under his boots, kit-kit, then gave an inch. Cold, bit clean. He liked it that way. Cold made men honest or sent them home. A shape came over the knob to the south, hat low, coat patched with two different pasts. Old Gus Hargreave rode a mule the color of a bad thought and chewed on nothing because he'd quit tobacco and kept the habit anyway. Frost had rimmed his mustache into white bristles. "Snow tells tales, boy," he said by way of hello, eyes already on the ground. "Morning, Gus." Gus swung down slow, knees cussing him. He squatted and laid a red hand on the crust. "3 sets in," he said. "From the south cut, boot with an outside chip steps long. One drags his right toe damned near every third pace. Men in a hurry that wanted to look more in a hurry." He sniffed, like the cold had a smell he trusted. "They'll circle back. Pride does that." Doc Hazel came to the door with her sealskin tight around her shoulders, hair tucked. Lydia stood behind her, wrapped to the jaw in Boone's mackinaw, eyes the color of hard creek ice, but clearer than last night. "We move or we wait?" Hazel asked. "Move," Boone said. "Town's got law, thin as it is." Gus tilted his chin toward the timber's edge without changing expression. "We got company first." A flicker through the firs. Slight. Wrong. The way a stump breathes when it's a man. Boone said nothing. He just set his hand flat where Lydia could see it and feel the calm in it. He stepped off the yard into the shade of the shed, took 2 quiet steps to the right, where the snow drifted high against the wall. Gus moved left, slow as patience. Hazel stayed in the doorway, stick down, eyes level. The scout came on cat-footed, rifle tucked in high under his arm to keep the oil from gumming. He paused to listen, and Boone took that pause away. 2 strides, a shove at the shoulder, heel behind heel. The man hit the packed yard with a breath that left him surprised to still own it. The rifle skittered, clacked, and ended under the sled runner. He was young in the way winter makes all men young. Hard eyes, soft beard, hunger. Gus had the man's wrist in one hand and his ear in the other, and turned both just enough to make the truth feel like a favor. Hazel didn't so much as blink. Boone knelt and picked the rifle, broke it open, tossed the cartridges into the snow where they winked dull brass. "Name?" Boone said. The boy licked a split lip. Don't matter. Your choice, Gus said, applying the ear in a new direction. Wait, he spat. Wade something. Folks don't ask for the rest. Who sent you Wade something? Wade looked at Lydia, then at Hazel's hickory. Pride balanced on a thin edge and slipped. Silas, he said, and Reeves. Pike ate cold beans and swore about it. Sent me to watch the smoke come out your pipe. See if you got extra souls in there. You come for the woman? Hazel asked, voice professional, like she was inquiring about a fever. I come for what he pays, Wade said, chin lifting toward Boone. But word sells better'n rope. Man in town buys news. Pays quick, pays quiet. Walt Dugan at Mabel's. Tell him a thing, he can make it walk anywhere on the wire. Boone felt something old line up with something new. Walt buys news, he said flat. Figures. Gus glanced at Boone. We ride Bitter Creek then. Boone nodded. He looked at Wade and saw a man not yet finished being made, just poured wrong, picking up bad mold. He took a length of harness strap from a peg and bound the boy's hands, not tight enough to cut, tight enough to teach. He left the lad sitting with his back to the shed and his ankles looped to a post. You leaving him? Hazel asked. He's not the kind that shoots first, Boone said. He's the kind that follows wrong until it turns on him. Boone set the boy's cap back on his head. Snow'll do the rest of the teaching. Wade looked small for a second, like the cold had found his marrow. Silas don't forgive, he said, half warning, half prayer. Law doesn't forget, Hazel said, as if that balanced the books. They saddled quick. Boone checked cinches and feel, ran a palm down the gelding's neck till the horse sighed. Gus tied down his bedroll the way a man ties down memory, with extra turns. Hazel mounted up neat and mean as a cat. Doctor's bag lashed behind the cantle, stick across her thighs like a second kind of spine. Boone lifted Lydia to the saddle with care and a grunt, settled her in front of him. She leaned back on him without apology, the way you lean on a door you intend to use again. You ready? He asked into her scarf. I am, she said. 2 in, hold for 1, squeeze on the out. Hazel's mouth twitched. See? She listens. They took the timberline north, staying in the shadows where the wind had left a hard skin and the drifts didn't suck a horse to the knees. Boone seemed the pace easy. Gus rode off his left shoulder, eyes flicking, the mule's ears telling half the story. Hazel brought up the tail, hat brim low, watching their back trail right itself. They passed the sleigh without looking at it. Dead things can call a man's eyes and steal his feet if he lets them. The wind dropped for half a minute, and what they had instead was a quiet that made Boone's neck prickle. Out here, he said, not loud, not for anybody in particular. Quiet's just alone. Gus grunted. Reckon we make a payment in town. Boone tipped his hat brim against a slant of snow and turned toward the low place where Bitter Creek ran under a sheet of glass. The day hadn't warmed so much as remembered. To try. They rode into it, 4 shadows strung out in a white world, headed for thin law and the hope it might still bite. Bitter Creek lay in a white trough with willow nubs poking through like bent fingers. Boone reined up on the near bank and let the gelding blow. The world was so still he could hear the ice sing under the snow, a thin, glassy note that comes from wait thinking about what it owes. We take it slow, he said. Spread out 10 paces. No bunching. Gus nodded, mule's ears twitching. Doc Hazel slid down and tested the surface with her hickory, tapping till the sound turned from hollow to true. Old seam runs there, she said, pointing at a faint gray vein angling from a riffle that didn't freeze right. Stay off it, or you'll learn how winter tastes. Boone swung down. He uncoiled a rawhide leg, tied one end to the saddle horn, the other around his own middle. He looped a short bite through Lydia's belt under the mackinaw. If it goes bad, he told her, you don't fight the rope. You let me be the fool who pulls. Her eyes were steady, but large. 2 in, hold 1, squeeze on the out, she said, as if practicing. Good girl, Hazel said, not kindly, just true. Boone stepped onto the creek, boots flat, knees easy. The crust took him, complained and settled. He went 3 steps, listening. The sound under him was a murmur, not a crack. He waved Gus to angle left toward thicker ice where white weeds showed. Hazel took station on the bank, coil of spare line ready. Come on, Boone told the gelding, voice low. The horse placed each hoof like a cat. Lydia sat small and tight in front of Boone's saddle, gloved hands on the horn, breath pluming at a steady count. They made 10 yards clean, the ice humming. Another 5, and the music changed. A spider of cracks ran out from under the geldings near 4, like a map of bad roads. Boone felt the sag through his soles. Easy, he breathed. Back 2, back. The crust let go with a pop, not a boom. The gelding dropped to his knees and scrabbled, shoes skidding. Lydia slipped sideways with the motion, the whirl tilting, horns sliding out from under her palms. She slid toward the faint gray vein Hazel had marked, toward that black water that looks like iron and tastes like the end of things. Boone didn't think. He moved. He threw the free loop, and it caught by feel, alone, a hard draw across Lydia's waist. The rope bit his ribs and slammed the air from him. He dug both heels into a seam where the ice held, felt it bite back. The gelding found purchase too, hauled with that deep grunt horses use when they mean it. Lydia's boot went through, one leg swallowed to the knee by slush and pain. She gasped. One sound, high, honest. Look at me, Boone said, and his voice found a tone he used for skittish colts and men at the edge. Right here, 1 breath, 1 step. Her eyes snapped to his. She dragged air in on the count Hazel had given her. Boone took the pull and made it into inches. The loop held. The ice held just enough. He got her clear of the gray vein and up onto the white place where the music was right. Gus slid his mule's weight off the line and into a pocket of thicker sheet, giving the ice back some courage it had forgot. Hazel never moved from the bank until the moment she had to. Then she was there with the spare line, keeping the rope high off the sharp rim that wanted to cut it. Don't fight the pull, she told Lydia, flat and even. You're coming home. Make your body long. Lydia did. Boone felt it through them the rope, how she stopped thrashing and turned to something the creek could slide under. He took 2 steps that were years, and then 1 more that was a life. The gelding lurched and stood, water flashing from his knees like broken glass. The loop went slack. Boone went to both knees and laughed once, a sound with no humor in it, just relief. Cold? Asked. Yes, Lydia said, calm as a confession, and alive. Boone hauled her leg free, boots sucking out with a wet pop. He wrapped her in the mackinaw tighter and put his body between her and the wind. Hazel thrust a wool scarf at him without looking up from the line she was coiling. You 2 do real pretty work, Gus said, as if admiring fence posts. The mule snorted agreement and shook ice from his fetlocks. Boone found the path of thickest ice and walked it, like a man reading a psalm he half remembered. The creek gave them the rest, without another mean trick. They climbed the far bank with a scrape of iron and a soft rain of snow off brush. Boone set Lydia down on a log and got the stove tin from his saddlebag, firing a pinch of coffee over a cat's paw blaze he built in a hollow of snow with shavings and stubbornness. Lydia wrapped her hands around the steaming tin. The tremble in them was small, but it was there. She looked past the rim at Boone. Her lips were blue and sure. If we live, she said, I won't leave you behind. Boone met her eyes and nodded once. He didn't say thanks. Out here, you don't thank a rope for holding. You coil it careful and remember the knot. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They drank, packed the tin, and swung up again. The wind shifted and brought them a thin smoke thread from the northeast, where a sign would hang crooked on 2 posts and say Bitter Creek with more hope than truth. Boone set his shoulders and the gelding's nose that way. Behind them the creek sang its quiet song like a debt collector walking off. Boone glanced back anyway. Out here, he said, almost to himself, quiet's just alone. Gus heard and spat a seed of ice. Reckon town's where we start paying. Bitter Creek hunkered under the fasten like a dog that knows better than to argue. 2 rows of false fronts faced a street hard as iron. Boardwalks lifted out of the drift, stove smoke laid flat by the norther. A church bell with a cracked lip counted noon wrong by 2 minutes and gave up. Boone rode straight for the little square building with a star cut into the door glass. Sheriff Amos Kellogg looked up from a ledger that might have been a Bible in another room, hair gone to winter at the temples, eyes the color of a creek in shade. He took in Boone, then Lydia, then Doc Hazel and Gus behind, and he was moving before his chair quit rocking. Hell, he said softly, which is what passes for welcome when a place is small. Set her down here. He swept papers off a cot with his forearm. Hazel was already unwrapping and rewrapping, checking what the cold had done since the creek. Rope burns clean. Frost took a nibble, not a meal, she reported. She'll keep her fingers if she minds me. Amos found his pen. Name. Lydia Pierce, she said, steady now. Silas Murdoch. Reeves Pike. Boone watched the sheriff's eyes at the name. They clouded, then cleared, like he'd seen that weather before and didn't care for it. I know the type, Amos said. Men who use other men's grievances for kindling. He wrote, the nib scratching like a small animal. All right. Statement on paper, statement on the air. I'll put a deputy at the door and one at the back. You won't be alone, miss. He eyed Boone. Law's thin out here, Whitaker. Still law. Boone nodded once. That's the line. A door banged open across the street, and warmth rolled out with a hum of talk and the bite of cheap whiskey. Mabel's place, painted 2 summers back by Hope. Walt Dugan stepped out with a towel over his shoulder, a smile that practiced on its way down the steps. Well now, look what the wind blows and won't claim, he drawled. Boone, Doc, Sheriff. His gaze slid to Lydia and made a show of being respectful. Heard a ruckus up the road last night. I keep an ear for trouble, you know me. That's the caution I like in a neighbor, Amos said, even as his mouth didn't move much. You keeping the wire honest today? Best I can, Walt said. Lines temperamental, more hiss than talk. He lifted a hand toward Lydia. Coffee on the house. Mabel's beans could nurse a man back from judgment. Hazel answered for all of them. We'll take coffee, she said, if it walks, not talks. Walt chuckled and vanished. Boone watched the heel of Walt's right boot as it turned, clotted with a smear of gray-blue clay stuck up under the leather, mica giving it a dull glint. Same gumbo he'd seen by the wrecked sleigh, where a seep ran under a drift and bled that color into the world. Not many places bred that gumbo. Boone filed it where he kept the quiet things. They crossed to Mabel's under a sky that wanted snow but hadn't decided how. The saloon was warm and smelled of stewed beef, old beer, and a floor that had learned to drink. A telegraph key sat at the bar's end with a run of wire sneaking through a knothole and went out toward the back. Walt slid cups their way, hands neat, eyes busier than his feet. Sheriff, he said, casual as rain, you want I should tap the railroad agent? Let him know Miss Pierce is safe. Could call her daddy, too, if the line minds me. Amos stirred sugar that wasn't there. We'll send proper through the office once I've got official words on paper. Sure, Walt said, agreeable as a Sunday. He drifted down the bar toward the key, left hand wiping, right hand touching metal. The key clicked once like a throat cleared. "Just testing," he said, smile easy. Boone drifted too, slower, just a cowhand taking his coffee for a walk. Up close, the key smelled faint of hot dust, and the kind of oil folks use when they care more about shine than function. On the shelf under the bar lay a wad of paper torn from a pad, the topmost sheet black with pencil. Where somebody had leaned hard, the one beneath bearing a ghost of letters. Girl in town, doctor, sheriff. Walt's hand moved. He folded the wad and tucked it in his vest pocket, as bright as you like a man putting away a toothpick. The ash of a cigar he hadn't lit dusted his lapel. Mabel herself, a square woman with shoulders made for hauling kegs and men to their feet, set a plate of bread on the bar and looked Lydia up and down with the appraisal of a mother who didn't have children but had decided to anyway. "Eat," she said. "Thin girls don't fight worth a lick." "Thank you," Lydia said, and ate like pride was a condiment she no longer needed. Hazel leaned her elbows on the bar and watched Walt watch them. "You have mud on your heel," she told him idly. "Blue clay. You don't get that in town unless you go looking." Walt's grin flickered and came back. "We got seep down by the stockyards," he said. "Horses drag the mess anywhere it pleases." Hazel said, as if she'd learned something, and maybe she had. Amos finished his coffee, set the cup mouth down, and turned to Lydia. "We'll walk you back across to my office. Paper first. Doc'll see you to a pallet in the back after. Boone, Gus, do me the courtesy of keeping your boots on the boards and your tempers in their scabbards. Not every fight that wants you deserves you." Gus winked an eye like a man who's forgotten how to wink. "I'm slow to deserve anything, Sheriff." They stepped into the street again. The wind had picked up a burr and worked it under the town's skin. A loose shutter clacked. A dog stood in the lee of a barrel with one paw cocked, saving it from the cold. Boone felt the hair along his arms lift through the stove, and Mabel's had been sufficient 2 minutes ago. Amos walked close to Lydia without making it a fuss. "Quiet here's alone, same as anywhere," he said low. "We'll pay some back tonight, I expect." Boone glanced past the sheriff to Walt's window. The curtain moved the way a hand moves when it doesn't want to be called a hand. A wire ticked twice behind the wall, fast and pretty like a bird bragging. Boone settled his hat. He could feel the town listening to its own heartbeat and waiting to be told if it was sick. He breathed steam, tasted iron from the creak in the back of his throat, and counted it down to the squeeze he hoped he wouldn't need. "All right," he said to the day, to the street, to whatever was making the wire talk. "Let's see what quiet costs." The day went gray as old pewter and held there. Amos had Lydia at his desk, pen scratching, when a clatter came up Main like a bucket down a well. A kid no taller than Boone's saddle horn slid off a lathered sorrel, eyes bright with the kind of fear that doesn't look for words first. "Mr. Whitaker?" He gulped steam. "Sir, your place?" Boone was already on his feet. "Say it," he said, voice flat. "Lit up," the boy blurted. "Could see it from the cottonwoods. Barn first. Sounded like popcorn when the rafters went. 3 riders cut sign west after. I think they shot a horse. Big bay with a star. She didn't get up." The room narrowed. Boone's chair went over backward and hit the floor. He didn't notice. His hand had found the Winchester, and his body had found the door. Amos was faster than a man his age had a right to be. The sheriff shouldered Boone into the jam so hard the wall answered. "You ride now," Amos said, eyes close enough that Boone could see the bloodlines. "You die pretty." "That was my lead mare," Boone said. His voice had gravel in it. "She pulled my first wagon. The rest hit the back of his teeth and stayed. Across the room, Lydia had half risen and stopped, both palms on the edge of the desk, to steady the world. She didn't say his name, she just breathed, 2 in, hold 1 out, like Hazel taught. Boone caught the rhythm from the corner of his ear, the way a drowning man grabs a rope. Walt Dugan's shadow crossed the frosted glass, and then the man himself eased in, towel over his shoulder like always. "Heard some hollerin'," he said, too pleasant by an inch. "Anything I can do for the community?" Hazel's eyes flicked to the damp on Walt's cuffs, and then to the telegraph key on Amos's shelf. "You can carry that coffee back across the street, Walt," she said, "and leave the listening to men paid for it." Walt smiled from a safe distance. "Sure, Doc." He tipped his head at Boone as if they shared a joke. "Hard winter for everybody." Boone took one step, and Amos's palm landed on his chest again. It wasn't force this time, it was weight, law putting its hand where it belongs. "You want to ride into smoke and 3 guns sighted on your door?" the sheriff asked. "They set the fire to draw you. They'll set you next if you oblige." "My barn is burning," Boone said. Amos nodded. "I know that tune. I've sung it. You going to make me arrest you to keep you breathing?" Gus spoke from the corner like a fence post, deciding to be a man. "Barn'll be ash by the time you get halfway, boy. What you can save is right here." He tapped the ledger, tapped Lydia's statement, tapped the badge pinned to Amos's vest. "You want it to mean something, you stand." Boone looked at his hands and didn't recognize them. They weren't shaking, they were closing. He set the rifle down very carefully, the way you set a coffin lid when you don't yet intend to nail it. He turned and drove his knuckles into the jamb just once, so he didn't drive them into a man. The wood gave a splinter and his skin gave blood, and the pain arrived like sense. Hazel was there with a strip of clean cloth before he could pretend he didn't need it. "Save your hands," she said matter-of-fact, rapping. "They still owe you work." The kid shifted from foot to foot, hat twisting in his fingers. "I can go back," he said. "See if the house—" "No," Boone said. Too quick, then softer. "No, son. You done your job. Tell Tom Hatch at the livery to wet down his thatch. If sparks ride the wind, I don't want the whole street liking the look." Amos slid the Winchester back across the desk toward Boone, but left it muzzle away. "We'll sit a guard at the ends of Main and at the back alleys. Put eyes on the church bell. If they're fools enough to try the clock, I want warning. You, Whitaker, you stay where I can lay a hand on you when your blood forgets what we're doing." Boone's jaw worked. "What are we doing?" "Keeping you alive till morning and marching the right men into irons," Amos said. "Then we'll count losses and decide what justice costs, not before." Through the window Boone saw smoke climb in a thin rope above the far ridge, black on gray, too straight for a chimney. He could smell it even at this distance. Wet hay, old pitch, singed leather. He closed his eyes and saw a bay mare with a white star between her eyes, head up and foolish, then down with a sound he'd heard 100 times in his sleep. He opened them before the picture set. Lydia came off the chair and stood in front of him. She didn't touch him. "Don't trade your life for ashes," she said. The words were simple and cut clean. "You save mine, let me pay on that." Walt lingered at the threshold like mold lingers under a board. "You want me to send for Mr. Pierce now, Sheriff?" he asked, hand already near his vest, where a fold of paper showed and hid. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. "We'll use the office wire," Amos said. His eyes never left Boone. "Yours seems to talk to too many ears." Walt's smile cooled a shade. "As you like." He left, the bell above Mabel's door jingling like it knew when to be small. Gus pushed his hat back and settled against the wall as if becoming part of it was a job he took serious. "They'll come sniffing after dark," he said. "Fire makes men bold and stupid both. You can count on that." Boone breathed. 2 in, hold 1. Out. Hazel's wrap tightened as the blood seeped and then stopped. The ache in his knuckles steadied him better than whiskey would have. "Out here," he said, low, not for effect, just to anchor the room. "Quiet's just alone." Amos nodded once. "We'll start paying at sundown." Boone picked up the Winchester and set it across his knees. He took the stool by the window, where he could see smoke thread the horizon thin as a lie. He wanted to ride. He sat. Snow began to fall in dry, stingy flakes that didn't bother to melt on the glass. The town held its breath. The wire behind the wall ticked once, twice, and then went very still. Snow came on fine as flour and mean as grit. By sundown, Bitter Creek was a long, low murmur under its own breath. Amos dimmed the lamps along Main to slits and sent Deputy Clay to coil a rope on the church bell. One hard yank from the boardwalk would ring it honest if things turned loud. He put another deputy at the alley behind Mabel's, and a third beside the timber shed where the wind stacked drifts like barricades a man hadn't had to build. "Lamps low," Amos said. "No hero talk. We let the night make us small and useful." Boone stood with him at the corner of the livery, hands working without noise. He had a tin pail full of charcoal ground to dust. When he shook it out, it disappeared on the snow and left a shadow slick as oil, a black skin that showed nothing till you stepped wrong. He dusted a path from the livery doors to the horse trough, then a second seam along the timber shed's lee. He tested it with the edge of his boot. It felt like a lie waiting for a listener. Gus shuffled up with burlap sacks and a pocket heavy with horseshoe nails. "Sprinkle, don't pour," he said, voice dry. "Make 'em wonder what tripped 'em. Wonder is slower than pain." He sewed the nails at the bend by the coopers, then deeper in the ruts where a man's eyes won't go when he's hurrying. The mule watched, thoughtful as a deacon. Inside the livery, Doc Hazel had a lantern turned so low it was an ember with ideas. She strapped Lydia's bandages down tighter and pressed a derringer into her palm, blue steel worn soft by long pockets. "Breath count," Hazel said. "2 in, hold 1, squeeze on the out. You don't shoot to scare, Miss Pierce. You shoot to place a thought in a man that keeps him home next time. If you doubt, don't. Doubt is loud." Lydia weighed the little gun. It had the heft of a promise she didn't know she could keep. "I won't miss," she said, not bragging. Hazel's mouth made a half-smile that belonged to no Sunday. "That's the point." Boone watched from the doorway, hat brim low, a shadow among longer shadows. "Keep to the lamplight if you fire," he told Lydia. "Let the law see what you do and why. That way the night can't lie about you come morning." Lydia met his eyes and nodded. The wool scarf Hazel had thrust at her earlier lay around her neck like a small flag she had decided to carry. Across the street, Mabel stacked chairs on tables and dragged 2 wet gunny sacks up onto the roof. "In case the North decides she hates shingles," she said to nobody. She blew out her lamps and left one on in the back to make the building look like it had a heart beating slow. Walt Dugan closed up with fuss and keys and the kind of smile a man puts on when he's already elsewhere. Boone watched him, too, the way a man watches a stray dog that never eats when you're looking. Walt hurried down the boardwalk, turned into the dark behind the assay office, and didn't come out for a time, Boone thought. Too long for a man counting tills. The wire in Amos's office clicked twice, stuttered, then cut off like a throat under a hand. Amos stepped out, hat on, jaw set hard. "Line's dead," he said. "Cut clean." "Where?" Boone asked. "South Pole," Clay panted, coming around the corner with a coil of wire he hadn't meant holding. "Near the siding. Somebody knows what a knife is." Amos nodded once. "All right." He took his station beside Boone at the livery corner where the street dog-legged and left them with a notch of shelter. "Remember, we hold, we don't hunt. Night does the hunting on its own." Wind combed the street in slow fingers. That kind of quiet can make a boy or unmake a man. Boone felt it go through him and leave the useful parts behind. He checked the Winchester by touch, ran a thumb along the front sight, and let the stock settle in the crook of his arm. "Out here," he said, voice smaller than the dark, but steady. "Quiet's just alone." Gus snorted. "Interest do," he said, and hawked into the snow neat as a signature. Hoofbeats came soft at first, wrapped in the storm's old wool. One horse, then two, then the hollow slap of a third shoe missing a nail, the kind of sound you learn when your life depends on iron holding to foot. Boone felt his neck remember that chipped heel he'd read in the shack yard. They saw nothing, and then they saw shapes. 3 riders gliding slow, letting their horses pick the footing, hat brims white with blown sugar snow. They drew up where the street ran. The lead man sat his saddle with his shoulders wrong, one higher. Silas had always leaned like the world owed him, and he meant to collect bent. The second rider slouched loose in a way that said knife first, gun after. The third hunched and scanned young, careful, not Wade. Wade was back there somewhere learning cold. This one was hungry in a different way. They halted. The horses blew and stood. The riders didn't call. That told Boone plenty. Men who call at night want to be heard. Men who don't are busy adding up the dark. Reeves, Boone guessed from the slouch, swung down first and ghosted into the alley by the Coopers without wasting a breath. Pike slid off and checked on the saloon's back door with the hand of a man who had opened too many doors with a gun. Silas kept the center of the street and let his horse turn slow to listen like a compass. Amos's finger tapped the boardwalk once, twice. Deputies shifted to the marks they'd made in daylight, behind barrels, under eaves, where light made friends with a badge. Boone lifted the pail and salted a last ribbon of charcoal dust across the mouth of the alley where Reeves had gone. "Now," Amos breathed. It wasn't an order so much as a hinge. Boone stepped back into his notch. The street held its breath. Lydia crouched in the livery's open door, Hazel above her with the lantern shaded, both women stone still. Pike came first, sliding along the saloon wall, boots careful. He hit the nail patch Gus had sewn at the bend, and stumbled once, twice bit it off, and kept moving. Reeves edged out of the alley, foot searching where there was no footing, and set his weight on the charcoal glaze. His boot did what boots do on oil. He went out from under himself with a sound men make when they are surprised by the bottom of the world. His knife flashed and clattered away like a fish on ice. Silas turned his head, and that was all. He didn't call. He didn't hurry. He nudged his horse 2 steps and let it stand where a lamplight licked his stirrup. He wanted eyes on everything at once, and knew he couldn't have them. Boone watched him choose and file away second choices. Smart is a mean weather when it wears a grudge. "Hold," Amos breathed again, softer, and the word went down the line like a prayer the church wouldn't recognize. Pike made the livery door and found it open to a black that had thoughts. He paused just long enough to learn nothing from it, then slipped inside, gun close in to keep the oil from slowing his draw. Hazel put a hand on Lydia's shoulder, and the 2 of them became one shape you couldn't find if you didn't know where to put your eyes. In the alley, Reeves got one knee under him, and his other foot went out again. Comic if a man didn't carry a blade. He swore low and mean. The sound floated and died on snow like smoke. Boone eased the Winchester up, not to shoot, but to draw a line with it. He could feel the town's bones under his boots, the joists, the piles, the name of each board. He could feel the mare that wasn't breathing anymore and the barn that had burned. He could feel the law standing an inch from his shoulder, a man named Amos who would take a bullet and ask you not to waste it. He laid the bead where the alley's mouth met the street, a place where a face would appear if it wanted to live wrong a little longer. "Keep your eyes on their breath," he said, low, for Lydia, for the deputies, for himself. Not their hands. Breath's the truth. Snow whispered. Leather creaked. Somewhere a shutter knocked twice and went quiet. The church rope hung down into the dark, like a sentence waiting for a noun. The first shot hadn't been fired yet, but the night had leaned in to listen. The night fired first. A pistol cracked down by the timber shed, bright, stupid, too soon. Reeves had gone to one knee trying to crawl the charcoal glaze, knife in his fist, and when his boot went out again, he shot at the ground like the earth had insulted him. The bullet chipped ice and bit a post. The echo ran main to the church and came back thinner. Now, Amos breathed, the word a hinge again. Doc Hazel moved before Reeves knew her shape. She came out of the livery's dark with that hickory held low and short, the way a surgeon holds a tool he doesn't want the patient to notice. Reeves swiped high. Panic, not skill. Hazel slid inside the arc and popped him under the ear with the stick's knob. The sound was small and certain. Reeves folded to his knees like a prayer gone wrong. Hazel put his wrist on the ice and pressed with two expert fingers till the knife let go of his hand and remembered the world without it. Sleep, she said, and Reeves did. Pike, hearing the shot, rushed the saloon's back door, half bent, shoulders up. He hit Gus's nail patch and kept his feet by spite alone. He kicked the door and found Gus behind it, all elbows and old tendon. They grappled in the lee of the jam, boots scrabbling. Pike bit. Gus laughed once, dry as a fence post. The old man rode Pike's weight down and pinned him with the muleman's kneel, one forearm tight across the throat, the other hand twisting the pistol away like he was unsaddling a rank colt. "Settle," Gus told him. Pike tried not to, then did. Silas didn't hurry. He swung out of the saddle slow and quiet, as if the night liked him. He let Reeves fall and Pike choke and saved his minutes for what mattered. Boone felt him before he saw him. The air behind his left shoulder breathed different. Metal kissed wool. The muzzle found the seam between Boone's ribs, the way a mean thought finds the softest place. "Should have left her to the snow," Silas said. His breath smelled of cheap rye and better grudge. "Could have kept your barn, maybe your mare." Boone's finger was on the Winchester's trigger guard, not inside. He could have rolled an elbow, risked a shot through his own coat and Silas's belly. The calculation took a heartbeat and told him a truth he didn't like. He was a hair slow and a hair too close. He held still. In the livery mouth, Lydia saw the angle of Silas's shoulders and the lay of Boone's hat brim and knew geometry no school taught. Hazel's breath count lived in her chest. 2 in hold. On the out, she brought the derringer up just enough for the front sight to nibble lamplight. "Let him go," she said. Her voice didn't carry far. It didn't need to. Silas turned his head half an inch, just enough to show a slice of cheekbone. The muzzle pressed harder into Boone's coat. "Or you what? Little—" The derringer spoke, a flat, rude pop that had no business being big, and was anyway. Lydia had aimed where cloth hung loose to keep from killing what she meant to save. The lead tore through Silas's coat at the back seam and bit his shoulder forward of the blade. He gasped the way men do when pain surprises them with its efficiency. The pistol in his hand dipped, his finger tightened on nothing. The shot went into snow and hissed out useless as spit. Boone didn't bump the inch. He stepped and turned in one motion, caught Silas's gun wrist, and drove the man's hand into the corner post. Bone knocked wood. The pistol clanged and fell. Boone didn't hit him again. He took a fistful of coat and hauled him into the lamplight where could see. Snow dusted Silas's lashes, and the sweat on his lip made a fine, bright line. Amos was there, shotgun low, badge higher. "Hands," he said, and Silas showed them because pain had made him practical. Amos kicked the fallen pistol aside with a boot that had done that work before. On your knees? Silas smiled, blood and spite. You think irons mean anything out here? They mean I don't have to bury you, Amos said. On your knees. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Silas went down slow like kneeling cost him a month's pride. Boone eased the pressure but didn't step back. He could smell wool singed by the muzzle blast and a thread of winter bleeding out the hole in Silas's coat. He could feel Lydia's eyes on him from the door. He kept his own on the hands, the breath, the places where may lie first. Behind them, Reeves groaned. Hazel towed his knife farther onto the charcoal, where it might teach the next fool a lesson. Gus hogtied Pike with a short length of rein and patted the man's pocket till he found a second blade and made it someone else's problem. Lydia stood up into the little light, Derringer still on Silas, but dipped enough for it to be a thought, not a sentence. The scarf at her throat had slid crooked. She didn't fix it. Snow touched her hair and melted because she ran hot now. You all right? Boone said, without turning his head. I kept my promise, she said. The words were quiet and very large. You did, Boone said. He let himself have one breath that wasn't meant for work. Good shooting. Amos's deputies poured from their corners, like men deciding to be seen. Clay took Reeves's wrists and laid iron on them with an economy that suggested practice. The bell rope stayed still. The town exhaled a little. From Mabel's back lot came the soft panicky of a man trying to be elsewhere without footsteps. Boone's eyes cut that way and found only the dark behind the assay office, a rectangle darker than the night around it. He filed it where he kept things that would need daylight. Hazel tugged Lydia's sleeve and checked her hands for tremor. You'll shake in a minute, she said. Let it. That's the body settling accounts. Lydia looked down at her fingers. They steadied themselves out of stubbornness and a little mercy. I won't drop this, she said, and didn't. Amos hauled Silas to his feet and turned him toward the office. You'll stand trial, the sheriff said. Town'll see it in daylight. You'll have your say, and I'll have mine. Silas laughed once, ugly and short. Daylight's for men who think names save them. Boone took his elbow, not rough, not kind. Daylight's where the law lives, he said. We're walking you to it. Snow thickened, the kind that fills tracks and makes a town new by morning. Behind the livery door, the lantern flame licked higher and settled. The night, insulted by the noise and the choices, backed off a step. Out here, Boone said, mostly to himself, to the woman with the scarf, to the law in a battered hat. Quiet's just alone. Interest paid, Gus said, tying his knot neat. For now. Dawn came thin and blue, the kind of light that makes a town look like it's remembering itself. Snow had skinned over the ruts. Main Street lay clean, waiting to be written on again. The stove in Amos's office ticked. Silas sat on a chair with his hands roped in front, where Doc Hazel could mind the bandage. The rope marks on Lydia's wrists showed pale against fresh linen. She watched from the cot, chin high, scarf crooked. Amos poured coffee that had learned to be honest overnight. Soon as the line spliced, we call the judge, he said. You stand in daylight, Silas. Silas smiled without teeth. Daylight loves a story. The door pushed in and Walt Dugan breezed through, with a tray like a peace flag. Hot cups for the keepers of order, he said. Fresh pot, Sheriff. Mabel sent biscuits. Amos eyed the tray, not the man. Set it there. Walt set it and fussed with napkins. The sleeve of his vest gapped. Boone, from the window, caught a flicker of singed paper tucked in the inside pocket, black crust around letters the color of old smoke. He looked at Walt's heels. Blue clay still clung where a careful man would have scraped. Deputy, Walt said lightly to Clay at the door. You want I should take the prisoner out to the privy before the judge arrives? Keep the office sweet? Clay looked at Amos. Amos shook his head once. He waits. Walt's smile held, but his eyes didn't. He lifted the coffee pot and made a show of pouring. His hand twitched. The hot stream missed a cup and splashed Clay's wrist. Clay yelped, jumped back, elbowed the latch. Silas moved as if the leap had been rehearsed in him all his life. He surged from the chair, shoulders screaming through the bandage, rope biting, and hit the door with his hip. It snatched open. He was gone into blue light before the coffee reached the floor. Boone was after him without a word, the Winchester in his hand and not yet shouldered. Amos came hard behind, badge bright, breath burning. Walt pivoted like a man who'd seen a trick work. He made the wrong choice of audience. Doc Hazel's stick took his ankle out from under him so fast the tray rang like a bell. Walt went down on his good intentions, wheezing. "Stay put," Hazel advised, and planted the hickory across his collarbone like a fence rail. Silas ran for the only open place, the creek. Fresh snow covered last night's scars. He hit the low bank and slid to the ice, boots slapping. Boone followed to the edge and stopped. He knew where the creek grew hollow under drift. He'd felt that map with his bones yesterday. He stepped out just enough to lay a line and backed onto the thinned pane. It sang low under him, a sound a man doesn't forget. "Turn back," Boone said, not loud. "Don't do this." Silas grinned hard, eyes bright as knives that have cut too often. "You ain't the hanging kind," he said, breath fogging. "I can smell it." "I ain't the shooting in the back kind either," Boone said, "but I'll put you down if that's where you drive me." Amos took position to the right, a pace on thicker glass, shotgun low. "Hands," he called. "Let the daylight finish this." Silas came on, gun in his bound hands, wrists sawn red by rope. He had enough hate to walk on water if the creek would humor him. The first 2 steps held. The third step found the hollow place. A spider web of cracks leapt from under his heel and raced. Boone felt it in his knees. He gave ground 1 pace, then planted. "You're already beat," he said. "Don't make the creek say it for you." Silas spat. "Law's a story for men who own paper." He took that last half step. The pain let go with a clean, hard crack. No drama, just judgment. Silas's legs went through to the knee. Water took him with a sound like sucked teeth. His gun popped from numb fingers and skated, then vanished into the black where fish don't swim. For 1 heartbeat, Boone saw the choice as plain as an axe blade, a man struggling in a cut he'd made for himself. Daylight ready to count this as an end. He could let the water finish him. Cold would do it clean. Quiet would balance its books. Boone slung the Winchester to his back and dropped to his belly. Weight spread, the way men do when they remember to live. He slid to the edge, seized the rope between Silas's wrists, and hauled. Ice bit his forearms. Silas's eyes showed whites and something like surprise. "Breathe," Boone said, which was mercy and an order both. "Don't fight. Make your body long?" Silas did, because death is a teacher that gets attention. Boone dragged him up onto honest ice, inch by inch, while Amos stepped in careful and clapped irons over rope with 1 sure motion. The cuffs clicked like punctuation. "Trial," Amos said. "Not water," Silas panted. He laughed once and made it hurt himself. "You could have let me drown." Boone sat back, forearms bleeding, little red mouths where the ice had spoken. "Out here," he said, chest burning. "Quiet's just a loan. I'm done paying it in bodies." Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. They frog-marched Silas back up the bank, boots slipping, iron bright against the new snow. Lydia stood in the office doorway, face pale in the blue, eyes clear. She didn't smile. Some things don't want that. On the floor, Walt Dugan tried to rise. Hazel's stick denied him. Amos yanked him up by the vest, and the singed scrap of paper fell from the pocket and tumbled to the boards. Boone towed it over. Half a telegram, edges charred, letters ghosted but legible, where heat had licked light. Girl in town. Doctor, sheriff. A smear of blue clay. Kay thumbed one corner. Wire knew before I did, Amos said. That you're doing, Walt. Walt wet his lips. A man's got to moneys. Mabel stood on the boardwalk, apron stiff with frost. Big hands quiet at her sides. You fed them our town, she said, voice made of old oak. She spat brown in the snow and didn't look at it. Other men did the same, a rustle of disgust like dry leaves. Amos turned Walt to face the street and read him his shame without poetry. Clay took the key off Mabel's bar a little later and handed it to the sheriff, who set it on his own shelf, like a truth that had changed owners. Silas sat down hard in the corner chair, iron on, rope under. He looked smaller with the creek behind him and daylight on his face. Lydia brushed a fingertip over the scarf at her throat and let her hand fall. Boone's palms stung. Blood had dried in the small rust lines where ice had kissed him. He cleaned them without fuss and watched the snow sift, filling boot prints, softening angles. Quiet again, Gus said from the stoop, hat pulled low. For a spell. Boone glanced at the thin line of smoke still far on the ridge where his barn had been. He let the pain stand with him and not drive him. Quiet's just a loan, he said. We'll pay the rest the right way. By noon the snow had gone from sift to hush. Bitter Creek stood in its boots and looked itself in the eye. The judge would ride when the wire sang again. Till then, the town did the work that keeps a place from coming apart. Harlan Pierce arrived under a freight sled and 4 bays blowing steam, not a gentleman's carriage. He climbed down in a wool coat shiny at the elbows, gloves torn where a man pulls rope. He took one long look at Lydia, at the bandage edge, the bad nights written around her eyes, and his jaw worked once like it remembered how to pray. Sir, Boone said. Harlan nodded back, words small in him. We brought timber, he managed, and men who know which end of a hammer matters. He didn't touch the badge on Amos's vest, or ask after Silas with a lawyer's mouth. He walked to where Boone's barn had been and stood in the blackened snow until his boots took the stain. Then he rolled his cuffs and shouldered a beam with 2 of his crew, cussing the weight under his breath the way working men cuss when they mean to keep going. Gus set lines and squared corners with a carpenter's shish eye that came from fences and long winters. Doc Hazel stitched men who kissed splinters and didn't pretend it made them brave. Mabel ran stew in a dented pot and cut bread with hands that had learned gentleness on debts paid and not paid. Deputy Clay hauled water, then hauled more. Even the church bell helped by staying quiet. They raised the first bent like it had always meant to be there. The smell of fresh-cut pitch rode over the old stink of ash, and that's a good smell in any country. Hammers took turns with salt. Ohs! The sound was steady, men talking in iron. Lydia stood near the hitch rail a while, watching that music go up, then shrugged free of the mackinaw and fetched a nail apron from the sled. You don't have to, Boone said. I know, she said, and tied on anyway. She handed out 8 pennies and held ladders and fetched water when Hazel said drink or I'll make you. Her stitches pulled now and then and she bit it off and kept on. When a brace wanted arguing, she braced it. When a man swore at his thumb, she passed him another nail. Nobody made conversation of it. That's a kind of mercy, too. Amos walked Silas and Walt, both ironed, from the office to the cell wagon they used when the judge was late to understanding. Silas moved stiff, shoulder bandage holding, eyes mean, but a notch smaller in daylight. Walt looked at the ground and tripped on nothing. Mabel didn't waste a word when they passed. She stared until Walt's face found a shade nobody wears by choice. "We'll run them to Gallatin when the wire clears," Amos told Boone. "Judge'll make the rest of the weather." "Law's work," Boone said. His hands were nicked and tarred with pitch. He flexed them and felt the ache like an old friend. Harlan came up with a mallet on his shoulder and paused, the two of them eye to eye over a pile of joists. "You pulled my girl out of a drift I paid for," he said, voice plain. "There's thanks I can't spend, so I'll spend lumber." He nodded toward the frame. "And a team on your fences come thaw." Boone tipped his hat. "Reckon I won't argue." They set the ridgepole as light began to lean. Men whooped once, not to poke the dark, but to tell their backs they'd done right. Hazel clapped sawdust from her hands and told 3 of them to drink, or she'd stitch their tongues together for practice. The mule sneezed. The dog under Mabel's barrel came out and decided the world didn't end this time either. When the work slowed, Lydia slipped away from the bustle like a thought, deciding to be a deed. Boone found her at the door of his tar paper shack, by the edge of the lot, the place he'd been calling home while the real one was a memory. She stood in the drift's soft edge, where snow shines blue before evening, and looped a wool scarf over the latch. It was the same one Hazel had pushed into her hands 2 days, and a longer lifetime ago. She didn't look at him right off. She looked at the scarf at the door, at her hands that had remembered use. "We'll pay that loan. Together," she said, quiet as a promise and twice as sure. Boone leaned a shoulder to the jam. The wood smelled cold and clean. He watched the crew across the yard set a last brace true and felt something in him settle to the same line. "Reckon this quiet's a debt we'll pay," he said. He didn't smile much. He didn't have to. The words lay where they needed to and held. Snow began again, the small, stingless kind. Mabel called that stew was hot, and a man better have a bowl before his stomach fought back. Amos hung the cell key on its nail and rolled his shoulders, like a man who'd carried a day and meant to set it down without dropping it. Gus fed the mule a heel of bread and told him not to brag. Harlan put a hand on Lydia's shoulder and squeezed once. "Tomorrow we raise the south wall," he said to no one and everyone. "Day after, fences. Spring comes whether we deserve it or not." Boone looked out past the new bones of the barn to the ridge where smoke used to climb and didn't anymore. The wind coming off the bridgers had lost its edge for an hour. He heard the creak of fresh timber taking weight and the soft clink of nails settling into their work. He smelled pitch and wool and stew and a thread of gun oil that wasn't a threat anymore, just a thing to be cleaned off by morning. "Out here," he said, "not to teach, just to tell the truth again. Quiet's alone. Feels like we made a payment today." Lydia touched the scarf, then his sleeve, then let both go. "There'll be more due," she said. Boone nodded. "There always is." They walked back toward the light and the bowls, and the talk that isn't about what hurts. Behind them, the scarf hung on the latch and moved a little in the breeze. Like a flag for a small country, 2 people had decided to found and hold. The storm breaks soft over Bitter Creek. A barn rises where ash lay, and 2 people hang a small scarf on a latch, like a flag for a country only they can see. If this story settled somewhere warm in you, tell me so. Drop 0 if you felt the cold, 1 if you felt the warmth. Saddle back next week for another trail. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the hoofbeats, and share this with someone who still believes the right thing is worth the price.